Hello. Let's take a look at my new plugin Coastline and do a deep dive on its filter. The filter is an essential sound design tool. It lets you sculpt Coastline's output, but it can also function as an audio effect in its own right. I was really inspired by the Make Noise QPass while designing this filter. The QPass masquerades as a basic filter, but it gives you some really interesting stereo capabilities, and you can do a lot once you start patching it. One of my favorite tricks with the QPass is routing one of the many outputs back into itself for some feedback modulation, which we'll hear more about in a bit. The basic controls of the filter are probably pretty familiar. Changing the cutoff frequency changes which frequencies are filtered out, and changing the mode will change if we filter out the high frequencies, the low frequencies, or both. Let's just sustain a basic sound here. In low pass mode, we're going to remove the higher frequencies. In high pass mode, we remove the low frequencies. And in band pass mode, we kind of remove both and just leave the frequencies that are centered around the cutoff. You can see what's going on in the visual on this knob. In addition, we have a resonance control, which is going to kind of exaggerate the frequencies around the cutoff. Again, you can see what's happening on this knob. We can do a lot of basic filtering here, but I think that filter sweeps can be fun as well. For example, I'm going to assign the sustainer age modulator to the filter frequency so that we reduce the frequency of a sound over time. Let's just hear how that sounds as we record a couple different sustainers. And each sustainer has a different filter. So when we modulate with the sustainer age, we are changing the filter settings for each independent sustainer, which can be really nice and just kind of create this really unique effect where things might start diverging from each other. Next up, we have feedback modulation, which is similar to what I mentioned earlier with the QPass. This is going to take the audio running into the filter, and it's going to use that to modulate the cutoff frequency at audio rates. A lot of times, I like to introduce a little bit of feedback instead of simply opening and closing the filter. When you introduce feedback, you're essentially going to introduce more harmonics, more distortion to the sound. This is essentially brightening the sound, and in a way, it's similar to opening the filter. For me, a lot of times I like just kind of keeping the filter in one location and changing the amount of feedback rather than opening and closing it, because that will brighten and darken the sound in a different way. Let's just hear that. This is also interesting because the feedback is centered around the frequency. So we can get this distortion that we can kind of decide where it really targets in the sound. Let's hear that again. We can have this really deep guttural distortion. Or you can put it up top and get a lot of sizzle here. I think this can be really fun to just kind of modulate rather than touching the cutoff frequency. It kind of adds a distortion and brightens the signal all in one. And if you want a bit more of a pronounced effect, it really compounds with the resonance as well. Next up, we can control the stereo spread of the filter. This is basically going to offset the filter in the left and the right channels to create a basic stereo image. This is a technique that the original Moog Voyager used, and it's really nice just for adding some width to your sound. Especially once you add a little bit of feedback, maybe a little bit of resonance. We can really hear the difference there. And I think this is really fun to modulate, especially with a bipolar modulator like an LFO. We can start to swirl around and move back and forth and get this really cool motion going. And then finally, at the bottom, we can change different settings for each channel. So we can basically change the cutoff frequency for all of the audio that can run into the filter. This might be useful if, for example, you might have Tide or Glade playing in a different octave, and you feel like you need to kind of set the filter frequency to just kind of be consistent across both of them. Let's kind of hear how that might sound. So if I put Glade up an octave, proportionally, Glade is much darker right now because we're filtering out more of it if it's up an octave. So we can kind of open the filter up if we kind of want to hear something a bit more consistent for both channels. Alternatively, sometimes I feel like I want to put something up an octave, but then it sounds kind of annoying. So you can even clamp the filter down a little bit more, just to make sure it's not getting too unruly compared to the other channel. And the other thing we can do here is we can also filter the input or the reverb. If you want to enable filtering for either, you just press this little button underneath it, and then you see we get the frequency offset for that one as well. But this is kind of cool because we can even just use Coastline's filter on the input. We don't have to sustain anything or use the recording feature at all. It can be interesting just to kind of sculpt your input, and then you have the full modulation matrix, all of these capabilities and everything. So let's try doing that. Let's just disable our recording entirely and just play around with that. There's a lot of fun you can have just playing something into Coastline and using it as a quick little configurable filter. You can also use things like the envelope follower if you kind of want to make some of these settings react to the volume that's coming in, which can be really cool if you want to kind of like auto filter sound. But I have a lot of fun just playing around Coastline as a filter like that because you can kind of slap it on anything. But anyway, this has been a deep dive for Coastline's filter. I hope you feel a bit more familiar with it, and stay tuned for deep dives for the other engines as well. Take care.